morning, evening, afternoon, everyone. We'll wait for a few more people to join. Seeing at least some of the usual suspects filter into the room. So, hi all. Welcome to the nth, sixth, I guess, total meeting of SCONE, the third interim between Bangkok and Madrid. As I understand it, we are primarily going to be taking like essentially continuing issue scrub and PR discussion to advance work on the joined protocol proposal. There is an open call for adoption for this proposal that completes at the end of this week. If I'm looking at the dates correctly, that should complete on the 24th. So as of next week, I have not seen any indication of anything other than support for adoption. So I expect we're going to call that one and then ask the authors to do an IETF 00 rev with the state of the document at that point. Would anyone like to bash the agenda, or shall we go directly into sort of issue and PR discussion on that draft? Suppose I should ask first, talking to an empty room with no feedback. Can anyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, cool. I'll do 6 more seconds of uncomfortable silence waiting for an agenda bash, and then point out that this is an IETF meeting that is subject to the note well with respect to conduct and IPR. I can throw that slide up if anyone here hasn't seen it. I don't see anyone on the list who I don't think couldn't even recite it to me. So IETF contribution, note well. With that, Marcus, could I ask you to throw up a screen again and drive GitHub? Do I have to approve? If you are speaking, we cannot hear you. Does anyone have audio from Marcus? Okay. Yeah, hi Maria. The agenda is we are continuing along with issue discussion with respect to the open combined draft. The one that is under consideration for adoption, but that adoption call does not complete until the end of this week. So, however, if you would like to bash anything onto the agenda, I am open to suggestions. Marcus, are you having? Yeah, it sounds like we might. I'm also hoping for a short meeting. It is a bit late here. I
Can
hear
you
something. It sounds like feedback. Yes.
Oh, great. I had to. Oh, yeah. Anyway, it works. Great. So I will request screen share. I'm clicking now.
Yes. Wait. There we go. Yeah.
Do you want to share screen? Yes. Can I choose? Oh, yeah, I can choose. Select. Is that what I'm sharing now? Can I see it? Oh, yeah. Okay. Let me rearrange a bit so I see what I'm doing. So, yeah, since last time we talked, so yeah, we had most of that discussion was on what was then a PR, which was then moved into an issue, and that is the issue around early indications. So that was, we had a pretty long discussion at the meeting, and that discussion has been going on here. So that is one of the, I would say, most interesting discussions that's going on right now. There is also an open PR, which I think is fairly uncontroversial. It's about renaming rate limits to throughput advice to be more aligned with the charter, the text in the charter, and also be clear that we're not just talking about throttling networks that are throttling. So, but I think that one is kind of uncontroversial. So, unless anyone else thinks otherwise, I don't know if we should reopen this discussion on.
So actually, let's do that one to see if we can come to some closure on it. So this is PR 31. The uncontroversial one. I do see that it's still got a changes requested showing up from Martin. MT, are you happy with the current state of this one, or?
Oh yeah, the changes were made. I should have cleared that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So this one is I think then emergible, and we can declare at least some success for this meeting. The other one is the PR 23, which has turned into the early indication
issue. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
So discussing the PR itself, I think, is not useful. Right. I think it's the discussion in the issue that is.
Yes, and this is primarily happening in issue number 5, correct?
Correct. There's a lot of long posts from a lot of people, so I'm not sure the best way to go about this. Maybe we should have prepared some discussion slides on this topic, or
possibly, but we're all here, so let's see if we can make some progress here. I would say there seem to be a couple of, it's not like a simple pro-con, we should do this versus we should do this discussion. It's kind of a multi-dimensional space.
Yes.
I think probably the right thing to do here is a gigantic free-for-all where everyone runs to the mic. No, probably the right thing to do here, I think, Marcus, could you summarize what you think the state of the discussion is right now in about 5 minutes?
Yep. Max. Yeah, I'll try to do that.
And then we will see the queue fill up, and then we'll see if we can make some progress on getting closer to each other's positions here.
Sure. So this all started with Ian is in the queue. Maybe you want to say something already.
Oh no, I'm just getting in the queue at the beginning because I figured that way I won't be at the end of the queue this time.
Okay. So yeah, this all started with we were thinking of a joint proposal, and then we had an idea that it would be good with an early indication that helps with certain networks to detect early that a SCONE flow that that a flow might be SCONE capable. So we started thinking about ways to design this early indication. And during that process, we realized that there are perhaps certain consequences and assumptions around this, and this has then turned into a rather bigger discussion on the nature of SCONE and the nature of SCONE adoption, I would say. So the issue here is that the proponents of having an early indication believe that this is potentially a useful tool for network elements or network operators that today identify flows that are subject to rate limiting. They identify these flows using deep packet inspection, and then if they can classify them into sort of some kind of group of applications or a bucket of flows, typically related to videos, then they will apply a certain policy. And one thing that was identified as a way to kind of motivate SCONE adoption would be that if you can early on, actually in the first packet of a flow, identify that a flow is SCONE capable, you could use that as a kind of signal to know that this is a flow that is capable of being throttled, and you can decide to apply your policy without resorting to deep packet inspection. So you save you potentially save then some resources in the network, and it becomes an incentive for these network elements to deploy this. Then there were some comments that this might only be useful when the sort of, or it might only be potentially useful when the ratio of SCONE to non-SCONE flows on the internet is quite small. So you have some, you know that if you see SCONE, you can treat it in this way. But if you start to see a large uptake of SCONE from a multitude of applications, and not just from these, native video applications and so on, this can arguably become less useful. Basically, you wouldn't gain that much from doing this. As long as you observe a quick flow, you could actually start your counter of observing throughput and waiting for SCONE packets, and you could pretty much enforce your policies that way. And then further on in the discussion, there was some comments being made that currently certain networks, they treat video traffic with harsher policies or stricter or like more restrictive bitrate ceilings than they do other applications. And then using SCONE as a way of identifying flows, there was a worry about would that then lead to a less inclination for like other apps or other endpoints such as browsers to actually adopt SCONE, because there might be a risk for SCONE to become like a throttle me signal, and that could be considered somewhat bad for potential adoption. But then sort of one counter argument to that would be that this early indication would be something that is strictly optional, and there could be recommendations around it stating that you should not use this signal or this early indication if you are not in full control of what your connection contains. So for instance, if you're a browser, it's probably a bad idea to use this early indication, because the indication itself could be a toggle for a certain policy. So then we basically come into the discussion of whether should SCONE at all be used as something that toggles certain policies. Is that a desirable thing or not? And yeah, I think that's where and what are the consequences of this? And I think this is where we are currently at, and we have some disagreements. I have my opinions. I can state them now, but I can also kind of open up for discussion. And first of all, if somebody would like to clarify, if you don't think I summarized it correctly, then you can also please jump in and see if there are aspects that you want to highlight, and then I think we can keep the discussion.
So I think, yes, with that, I will put the queue open. Welcome to the front of the queue, Ian. Have you got an opinion that you would like to share?
Yes, and this is a large issue, and I think you did a really nice job summarizing it. And if, from a procedural perspective, if we could kind of try to piece apart a few of these things, it would be really nice, just from like, because there's a lot going on here. And I think one question I have, I guess I have more questions than answers, so like, probably not the most helpful thing, but one is kind of, as a group, do we expect that browsers will send SCONE on every connection or on some subset thereof? And if so, how would they decide, like, what subset? I guess is one question. I agree that I think in the past we've been thinking about SCONE as like an indication, like this is video almost. At least a lot of people have been, which I think based on the use cases defined is reasonable. I don't know if that's what we want it to be, but like, I think that's true. This discussion highlighted the fact that I have no idea how I'm getting data from a browser back to my server to use it for server-side AVR, which made me really grumpy. But that's kind of only tangentially related. Because it makes a lot of sense that you would want to send a SCONE packet on the path that is actually traversing, not the reverse path. But unfortunately, that means that the person who gets the information is not necessarily the person who's able to best use the information. I think there's a separate issue for that, but that's probably actually the issue that to me is like most concerning at the moment as a congestion control slash, AVR sort of person. But yeah, I don't know how to resolve it though. So.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so I kind of made this point at the last interim, and I've made this point on the issue discussion, but I'm going to reiterate it, that a lot of the discussion, as Marcus excellently summarized and Ian pointed out, has sort of, I'm not going to say devolved as much as expanded to questions that, at least to my mind, are not strictly related to the indication itself. And I want to be clear on that, because some of these like sort of philosophical questions about what SCONE is or is not, how endpoints should use it, how browsers should use it, all of this kind of thing is, to my mind, mostly irrelevant to the technical mechanism of putting an indication, because at least without this, the protocol without the indication has basically all of the same properties regardless. So, that all of those same questions apply whether or not there is an indication in the first packet. People can disagree with that, and I would like to hear how it materially changes these considerations, but I think it's worth calling this out because if we're going to make some progress on some of these issues are perhaps slightly more tractable in terms of like having a outcome in terms of, do we put something in the draft or not? And some of them probably take some more discussion about, philosophical questions about what we put in the draft in terms of like how we're suggesting certain entities use SCONE. So yeah. Oops, wrong button.
Oh, super fast meet echo. So the great thing is that I think I agree with most of the people on this thread and the discussions that are going on there. I think Marcus points out that in a world where every flow uses SCONE, there's no value in one of these signals, because you either send the throughput advice or you do not, and that's the end of the story. And there's no privacy leakage at that point. To Christian's point in chat, if you have a signal and that signal means something, then you've just leaked information that potentially is damaging privacy, potentially not. I mean, it's pretty hard to quantify it without actually knowing what the conditions are. But my view is that ultimately we would have the browser send every quick flow that they initiate would have this capability associated with it. Whether or not any advice from the network was actually acted upon would be the key question. So for me, I think the biggest potential for an indication comes in a transitionary phase where there's no flows doing SCONE and then some flows doing SCONE. And in that some flows doing SCONE case, there's potentially a case for network operators to be wanting to distinguish between the flows that they can sort of leave alone a little bit and just provide advice for, and those that they can't. But I think it's one of those impossible to guess situations, and what we end up with in the short term is exactly the same sort of fingerprinting that I think Christian is concerned with, because the applications that care about this will be those video specific applications, and they will only include an indication when they think they might be able to use the information, and we've just broadcast effectively that this is happening. Ian had a question earlier about how this would work in a browser. As I think we discussed last time we met, the browsers don't know exactly what a connection is going to be used for when they make one. Oftentimes, so we would have to enable this for every connection that is created, and then we would have to provide some sort of way for the JavaScript application to get a signal. We don't do anything with that information ourselves. This is all the JavaScript applications doing that. So if you're running some sort of video application, then you would register for interest in that signal, and then you would get it or not, depending on whether it was available. So, yeah.
Christian, you're up.
Yeah, I mean, Martin mentioned the privacy issues, and I'm very reluctant to have anything that looks like enabling fingerprinting. I understand that people are doing DPI, but my position is that we should prevent them from doing so, not enable them to do it some more. So that's one thing. The other thing that is not in the thread is that we have this principle and protocols of use it or lose it, or basically the protocol is the meaning. So if we define the protocol with indications, and people don't want the network to use it as a fingerprinting, then you can be absolutely sure that the application are going to provide strategies such as put that on every connection, put that on a random connection, that make it impossible to guess what the application actually is. So I mean, the whole idea of having a flag that says, hey, I'm a video, that's not going to happen. Okay.
Okay. Sanjay, you're up.
So I think everyone who has spoken here before me, they all have very good points. So the only thing I'm trying to think here is that let's just keep few things in mind as we design this protocol and make sure that this gets widely deployed because this brings a lot of value. But I think some of the challenges that we're sort of running into is that, should the indication, is there privacy? It's a right concern, but just think about it is that the device is attached to the network today, and unfortunately it's doing adaptive bit, not unfortunately, but the result of it, the application is capable of adaptive bit rate. What it really means is that it can play video at different encoded speed. The problem today is that it just doesn't know what is the best throughput that it should use. So maybe it starts with high or maybe it starts with low, depending on what the application is. So the challenge for the intelligence that's already built into the application is not rightly used, because application is screaming saying that I'm capable of doing adaptive bitrate. Wish I just knew what is the best bitrate for me to use. Right? That's the device. Now on the network side, network is also probably wondering that, hey, this client, this request for video session can probably, if it maintained maybe 420 or 720 p, this would be the best in the network that I can support. But I don't have a way to tell this device what it should do. So I just have only one way to do it, and I'm going to do it in this one way. So there's just lack of communications, right? And that's what we're trying to solve here. And not so the question where we are at is that we have some video application that will start adopting it, and the networks will also gradually, hopefully over time, will start to adopt, and more applications will use video SCONE signaling, so that it becomes universally adopted, both from application side as well as from the network side. The challenge to get there is that network does not know how to deal with the adaptive bitrate application that it is trying to get the signal. So if there's a way, if the device is saying that, hey, I'm adaptive bitrate capable, so that's the indication. If it gets, then network that is SCONE capable can appropriately handle that request. In absence of an indication, it's a challenge, because network is only looking at the signal from the client going in the uplink direction. It is not looking at the signals and information that is coming downlink side, right, from the server side. So the early indication would be one good way that at least solves the problem that we would have to start the deployability of the SCONE solution. So that's kind of what my take is, and that's kind of why the whole motivation was to try to see that if we design it in a way that it becomes easier, that it gets deployed in the network, then that would be the good way to get this protocol going. And maybe down the road, I don't know when that happens, if it's universally adopted, maybe that at that point we can see whether or not that indication makes any sense. So that's my take on it.
So I threw myself in the queue as chair to ask a question to try and steer the conversation, but it actually turns out that the conversation kind of steered in the direction that I wanted to, like with respect to, discussing just the point of early indication and how that ties to sort of like the early part of the adoption, and not into some of the more philosophical questions. I've realized in listening to this conversation that I'm actually, and now I'm dropping down to completely individual here. I'm a little confused. So what I think I hear is we need an early indication of desire to receive bitrate information, right? Like, so, hey, I can react to a bitrate change in order to make a policy decision at the network side that is currently made via DPI. So it's essentially taking the DPI-based decision and turning that into a policy, disabling that and saying, hey, this is SCONE enabled, therefore we can signal. Is that correct? I would ask, that's a clarification question to someone. Please jump in and say, no, Brian, it's too late. Or yes, that's what we're talking about.
Yes, that's what we're talking about. And that's informed by the way that, in particular, these policies work today in mobile network packet cores.
Got it. Okay.
So the indication is designed in a way to be amenable for that particular use case.
Cool. Do we all kind of agree that having so we're not chartered to provide any signaling to the network other than, hey, I would like to have the bitrate information, please put it in this bit range of this packet using this encoding. Obviously, the network is going to, that's a signal, that's part of the public API, Hiram's rule, that's an indication to the network that will result in network level inference about these packets. And what we're saying is we want to use that result to drive adoption. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I would say that we already have that in the document, right? We already have something clear. It's just changing when an opportunistic signal shows up.
Right. So we can apply so the idea is by being able to apply the policy earlier, there's a operator level incentive to install boxes that can SCONE and to enable SCONE on the boxes that can.
That's the premise. Yes.
Okay, cool. I want to keep the queue going. One thing that I would like to hear is if there's anybody who believes that is not useful for driving adoption, I would like to hear that. Because I think if we can agree that it is potentially useful for driving adoption, then maybe we can come to converge on this. And then we can take all of the other philosophical issues that have showed up in this issue discussion and carve them off or take them to other issues that are already open for them. Because I'm kind of trying to, hey, we're all here stupid early in the morning or stupid late at night. I'd like to see if we can make some progress on this one. So I would like to ask people to consider that, but also continue speaking on the reasons that you were in the queue. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I think that was a great question. So as you said, the assumption behind having the indication is that during the early phase, only small amount of the connection was sent SCONE, and then we could deploy mailboxes, network elements that doesn't have the capability of handling 100% SCONE, but rather that you could, for example, deploy a network element that can only handle SCONE as long as the amount of SCONE traffic is 20%, for example. But the question is, what would these network elements start doing as SCONE becomes successful and we see SCONE used everywhere? I'd say that the most reasonable thing that these network elements would do at that phase would be to actually fall back to doing congestion controller-based throttling because they don't have the capability. So to paraphrase, by creating indications would be essentially creating planting a mine that fires the moment SCONE becomes successful, which ultimately hinders adoption or destroys the benefit of having SCONE at the moment SCONE success. So I think it's a very counterproductive way to promote SCONE. Right. So to that end, I think what Marcus said is reasonable in the sense that we could probably define the signal as a pure alternative to DPI. This is saying that, if I send indications, this is a video, and you might do CC-based throttling. So if we change the meaning as such, maybe it becomes less harmful, but then the question is as you said, is it even within the charter, if it's going to be about exposing a signal of the type of the traffic? And there's all the concerns that Marty and Christian raised. So I'm not in favor of doing that, even though I can understand why people need it. People want to have it. That's all from me.
So I got originally in the queue to respond to some of the fingerprinting concerns. And so, like I said earlier, there is no the indication proposes no new information to be exposed to the network that was not already available with the flow. And I think that's just an objectively true statement. So again, feel free to disagree with that, but I don't think we did necessarily disagree with that. Now, the question of whether it encourages fingerprinting or not, again, this is motivated by existing, these are not hypothetical, these are existing network elements that have motivated this entire line of work to some extent that do DPI. And the DPI is very specifically parsing the entirety of quick initials, decrypting them, and parsing out the SNI field in the client hello. That is by far the most common way that this is done. It is widespread. It happens to all video content providers on many networks. And so that's one of the things that was motivating this. Now to the question of fingerprinting, the way that we've been thinking about this is that the fingerprinting surface question is very similar to the considerations that apply to things like encrypted client hello, which has similar challenges, where if you try to deploy encrypted client hello today and you're a video application provider and you have the SNI only meaningfully in the inner client hello, then the network loses its ability to classify that traffic as with the policies that it wants to apply. One way to get around that with encrypted client hello is to have an outer SNI, an outer client hello that still has the SNI field where you control what's in it. It may not be the real one, but maybe you just put enough information in there to have the policy available to the network element. So viewed from that lens, it is an ECH is an enabler of less fingerprinting, a smaller fingerprinting surface. So the same is true of an indication. If an indication allows you to get rid of even that outer SNI that has outer client hello with an SNI, that reduces the fingerprinting surface that is available to the network, because now it just knows that this is a SCONE capable client. That is the fingerprinting surface that is available to a client. So I don't think that these arguments about a fingerprinting surface are strictly correct in terms of just what the protocol is. It is allowing clients to have potential and video endpoints specifically to have less fingerprinting surface than they do today by removing the ability for DPI to be as useful as it is today.
Let's say that I do not completely agree with Matt. I mean, an extra signal is an extra signal, whatever you discuss about it. And I think that the business of this trade-off that people maybe will not do DPI, I think it's a fool's bargain, because I know that, we never told the network that they should do DPI. In fact, we are telling them the contrary, and they do it nevertheless. So there is absolutely no reason to believe that if you give them a little bit more information, they will stop. That's not true. Second, we have this discussion that maybe having SCONE is an alternative to doing congestion control based signaling. I think that's not in Charter. The Charter says something about there's no reason to use SCONE as a congestion control signal, etc., etc. It also said that the SCONE signal, that basically you need the congestion control signals anyhow to adapt to what the network is actually doing. So saying that this is a replacement of congestion control is just not true. And third, we have a Charter issue, because what we are proposing here is a signal to the network saying, hey, I am an application of this specific class, treat me as that class. That's widely out of the Charter of the SCONE working group. The SCONE working group is very restricted in the Charter to say the network will find a way to provide throughput information to the clients, not the other way around. So really, I think this discussion of indication is weird, and I would rather that we absolutely do not do it, precisely because it can be used by fingerprinting to fingerprint a class of application, whilst the SCONE signal itself is less convenient to do that. Next.
Okay, there are so many good talking points coming, so it's hard to remember what I originally wanted to reply to. But I just want to say a few things. I kind of agree with most of this. I think and hope we could come to a world where most of the traffic is SCONE based, and we would have network management policies that are completely agnostic to the types and categories of traffic. And you could consider things like long-term throughput and kind of design your policies around that and the capability of exchanging explicit information. My worry is around pragmatism and like incentives for deploying this at all from a network operator perspective. So and also some of the confusion with all this might be that when we, as Ian pointed out, when we started talking about this a couple of years back, we only had this very particular video throttling use case in mind. So we were all kind of just thinking from the perspective that, yeah, if you use SCONE, you're probably like one of these video applications, and we want to make sure that the way that this is done works better for end users. And then we realized that something like an indication and being able to get away from parsing SNIs and all of that would be a great incentive for network operators to deploy this, because it costs way less to do that. And that is true. We have in discussions we're having. I cannot mention any companies or anything, but the discussions we're having with network operators on this topic is very much like, it sounds very attractive to a lot of them to be able to reduce their DPI burden. And of course, having something then sent in the first packet to indicate that this is a flow capable of receiving indications could then be seen as an alternative trigger to activate their policies. Kazuhu in this thread, he made a very important point that because these policies are kind of differential, meaning that certain applications don't get throttled like this today while others do, then that could be an incentive to not deploy SCONE at all for kind of non-adaptive video applications and so on. And maybe that to me is more an argument for not using the early indications if you are that type of applications potentially. Then of course we come to the fingerprinting issue that Christian and other mentioned. I would like to, either we just see, like Matt says, this is just an indication that something is SCONE capable, but the consequence of that might be that you trigger a more restrictive policy. So another way of seeing this indication could be that if you send it, you are pretty much willing to accept the harshest policy that the network provides potentially. It doesn't have to say anything about what type of application you are. You're just indicating that you are okay with having the strictest policy that the network can provide. Whether that is enough or whether that is too much of a fingerprinting, and whether it's in charter, I think it's up for discussion as well. But yeah, I think that's where we are right now. We have I would love to see SCONE be deployed. I would have a very hard time motivating operators to deploy this by some grand vision of how they will reshape their current throttling policies. I hope that by doing this, we can gradually influence influence this into better ways in the future. That would be my...
So one thing I wanted to add back here is that I've heard congestion control brought up quite a bit, and I do want to emphasize that SCONE is not solving congestion control problem, and I don't think SCONE would be used by the operators to determine how it should apply its congestion control algorithm. That's separately administered and what we're really talking about is the adaptive video applications, adaptive bitrate video applications. So, and I think we should probably not conflate that somehow this is something that would be used for congestion control, because this will not be used for congestion control. This does not come into the decision of where congestion control happens, as that may happen through the core or through the access or through the radio network. And there are different mechanisms that come into play in the decision making of how to handle congestion control. So I really think we don't do ourselves justice when we try to conflate this, what we're trying to solve here, as congestion control problem, because the decision point where rate limiting is applied, say the UPF and 5G, that is purely making decisions based on certain data plan subscription, devices that are that can handle resolution better, smaller devices, smaller screen size. They're making decisions based on purely video applications and not based on any congestion control. So when I hear congestion control, and I've seen this many times, and I'm just trying to say that this is not a congestion control problem. And if we think we're solving congestion control problem, then we're not solving it right by doing SCONE.
Okay, so I wanted to respond to Christian's point, which is that to say that I don't think it's our place to just decide what people will or will not do when they show up and say that it would be helpful to deploy something. So there's a fairly strong motivational empirical reason for not wanting to do DPI, which is that it's costly. I understand that the tendency is for people to have a lot of assumptions about the reasons why people do DPI, but like there's also like reasons why they would like not to. Operators would like not to do DPI. And a very compelling reason for that is that it's extremely expensive, because in Quick, we encrypted the initials. So we have, in this, in this group, we have heard from people that represent operators. We have heard from people that represent equipment vendors. And we've heard that in these discussions, and I say as video content application, I have heard similar things, that this would be a compelling reason to not have these kinds of DPI, because this particular use of DPI is predicated for this video policy. And this would be a compelling alternative as we transition into a world where there is more SCONE, for example. So I don't think we can just ignore that and say that, oh, I don't believe you, or I'm skeptical. We're not saying that like this is going to replace all DPI on the internet. We're saying that this particular use case of DPI, which is solely motivated by applying video policies to video ABR traffic, could actually be gotten rid of by SCONE. And we have people that are saying that. And I don't know how we can say that that's not true when people are showing up to the working group and saying that it's true. So, yeah.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone, for the I think quite useful discussion. I'm not sure that we're converging yet. I did hear the charter come up a couple of times. I very much do not want to relitigate the charter. I see my job as chair to keep us on charter. I do think, with respect to the question, are we chartered to define a new explicit signal to the network that can be used for driving policy? No. However, I do think we are chartered to create a cooperative signal between endpoint elements and network elements. And when you apply Hiram's rule to that, the very existence of SCONE is going to be used as an indication whether we intend to make it so or not. And building a network cooperative system where the network elements do not know whether the network cooperative system is in use or not seems like an interesting area for open research, but probably not something we can tackle in this working group. Sorry if that attempt at humor did not work. It is now 10 till midnight. So I do think that while saying, hey, we are doing this explicitly because we want to replace this signal is probably not something that we would be chartered to just, in isolation with, outside of the considerations of, hey, it's a signaling protocol, people are going to infer things based on that. I do think that it is very much in charter for us to think about what the incentives are for deployment for this, because I really don't want to be, up at midnight for a thing that will never actually show up on the internet. So yeah, I think that where I'd like to get on this issue, and I think I'd like to take this issue and the discussion on it and get it back down to exactly what we're trying to determine. Do we believe that an early indication of SCONE is a useful way to drive early adoption or not? If not, why not? If so, and are there properties of how it is implemented that would make it more or less useful to do so? I don't think we're going to come to closure on that here in the next 40 minutes, but I do think that we can take that back into the issue discussion here, take all of the other sort of take all of the other sort of sub discussions that have come off of this and carve those off into their own issues, but see if we can come to closure on that in the thread. Ian.
Two quick questions. One is there there's not a specific proposal being discussed? I mean, is that correct?
There's a specific straw man proposal it's deliberately not, completely fleshed out. Kazuho actually made some very good additions to it anyway, but it's just there to give people the idea of how this would work. That is a separate PI that is linked on this issue.
Okay. I missed that. I'll go back and find it. And the other question is, based on the discussion, I'm a little bit confused about whether we think the SCONE indicates that an application is an adaptive video application or not. I think I heard at least two very different perspectives on that statement. And I think I can deal with either, but I kind of want to know which we're doing. I don't know. I find this a little bit confusing as a person who's obviously going to be delivering a ton of video. So that's it.
Another 5 seconds of uncomfortable silence.
Apparently no one really wants to answer that question.
Unless anyone wants to answer that question. Actually, yeah. So I think that that's actually kind of tied to my earlier question about let's consider whether this drives adoption, because I think that if the answer to Ian's question is we think that SCONE, at least right now, for some version of right now that we can decide with a version changes no longer later. If we don't think that that means, hey, I'm probably adaptive bitrate video, then the assertion that we can use this to drive adoption and DPI disablement becomes less compelling, I think, right? I think those two things are tied to each other. Matt.
I don't think they are tied to each other because Kazuho, can you mute while? Yeah. The reason I think they're not tied to each other is because it's the decision making on a network operator standpoint, as someone who's not a network operator, but it's not solely based on is it video or not? What we're hearing is that for certain things, if they're able to not have this particular way of classifying every single flow through that goes through their network, then they would use it regardless of if it's video or not, right? Because it just happens to be that video is the target of their current policies, because it's a very large portion of their traffic. So it in some ways, like, again, like, so I don't think we have to make any statement about it.
Okay.
It's just that we've heard that it would help them be more amenable to deploying it, and that's a very real consideration when, you know, we want this to actually go somewhere.
So let me rephrase my earlier not quite a question. If we're basically say if the SCONE signal, if the presence of SCONE signaling is essentially saying, I am willing to adjust my bit rate based on any signaling that is applied to this, then that allows us to get rid of some DPI.
Well, it's not even that strong of a statement. It's a statement of saying that I would receive those packets if the server also supports it and then sends them. That's
Okay.
that's what it's saying, right?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
my assertion is that information is already available in the client hello, in the transport parameter extension, due to the nature of how this protocol is negotiated, unless you have encrypted client hello on. So
Right.
that my assertion here is that we're essentially taking information that's encoded in one place and moving it elsewhere for the purposes of easing deployment and making this protocol more likely to be deployed in the real world, as opposed to, you know, in theory.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Kazuo.
Right, sorry, Matt. I just clicked the wrong button. I mean, I just wanted to click my hands button, but sorry. So regarding the point that, I mean, SCONE could be potentially used for signaling that, hey, I'm going to obey to the bandwidth advice. That might be possible for some video clients that know that the server has all the correct bit rates. But unless you control both sides, it's not even the case. So even if you are a video client, it's only when you know who exactly you are talking to that you could send such a signal. So that's, if it further limits the utility of indications, if we think that it's going to be a way to indicate that, hey, I'm going to send at whatever bit rate the network tells me to. And going back to the question of what the deployment incentives are, I'd say that the incentives that the networks, that the endpoints can provide to the network elements is that all the traffic potentially becomes bitrate adaptable, regardless of who is talking to who. For example, the client might be talking to a download server. This is one of the remote examples. But then, because assuming that the clients would attach the SCONE signal to all of them, and assuming that either the download client or the download server would communicate the bandwidth signal, then the the endpoints are providing the opportunity to attach the bitrate signal and let the clients adapt it. I think that's the core benefit that the endpoints would provide to the network elements. I mean, to throttle any traffic from, regardless of video, from anybody to anybody, or any file download traffic or whatever. So I think we should probably focus on that, and probably that is strong enough for network elements to adapt this signal if we could, for example, have SCONE being adopted by web browsers.
Cool, thank you. Let's see. anyone else want to jump in the queue on this, or shall we close discussion on this issue? I think I would ask Marcus, because go ahead, Martin.
Hi, I think I said this in the chat already, but I think the X factor here is, what do endpoints decide to do? That if like all the browser vendors just make whether a collective decision or a bunch of individual decisions to just always advertise SCONE capability, then this discussion doesn't matter at all, because then it will neither be a DPI. It will not free people from needing DPI, and it will also not providing a social fingerprint. So like all the concerns in both directions are worried about just are non-operative. And I don't know how to judge whether endpoints are going to make that decision, but like I don't know if we can like defer this or something until that becomes clear, if that's possible. But it's possible it's a waste of time.
I mean, what we're kind of asking ourselves to do is predict the deployability of a protocol while we're designing it. And while I can tell you with some degree of certainty that the probable uptake curve will look logistic, I'm not sure that I could confidently predict, either of the parameters of that logistic curve. So Martin Thompson just said in the chat, plan if we implement would be to make SCONE available on every quick flow that Firefox initiates, right? So that's some indication.
Yeah, that is. And if a couple other endpoints said that, then like this whole discussion is neither here nor there.
Right.
Martin, can you clarify when you say neither here nor there? Are you saying that like the indication is not useful, or what are you saying that this, like, what would, if we have lived in a magical world where every quick endpoint on the internet advertised SCONE tomorrow, which is,
yes.
Are you saying that the indication would not be useful?
I'm saying that there are two values that we're arguing about here. One is that it would encourage adoption by freeing people having to do DPI, and the other argument is that this is providing a undesired signal to the internet. And I know you dispute this, but an undesired signal to the network about what the traffic is. We have universal adoption where it doesn't matter if I'm doing like chat or radio or audio or video or Google search, and I've always got SCONE. Then that does not free anyone from doing DPI, but simultaneously is not providing any meaningful fingerprinting signal to the network. And so like all the values that we're arguing are not affected by SCONE at all.
Okay. I think in that world, it's still useful to have the indication for the transition on the network elements side, because this is fundamentally about trying to make it easier for them to deploy.
So I think that is an interesting point, Matt, that you just pointed out. Like at the early point, during that early phase of the logistic curve, because I said I can't tell you what the parameters of the logistic curve are, but I'm pretty sure it's a logistic curve. I am actually pretty sure it's a logistic curve, right? Like even if we get to a point where we are turning stuff on tomorrow, it becomes fairly steep, but it's still is driven by sort of the rollout policies of the various endpoints. And those are not synchronized. So I think if I can paraphrase, and you can tell me if I'm getting this horrendously wrong, you're saying no matter how fast we do this, there's still a meaningful transition period in which it's a useful signal for driving down the deployment of DPI.
Yes, and I will say that is informed by discussions with people that operate networks and the people that also, build the things that do this.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I think with that, Marcus, could I actually ask everybody? So I've been taking notes on this discussion in the Hedge doc. We'll publish those as minutes for this meeting. These will mostly, I think, inform the discussion on 5. could I ask you to jump into that thread and, given the output of the last hour of our discussion, try to drive that one to closure on that one point?
You can try.
not tonight. Like, you can go to sleep first.
No, sure. But I'm not sure. Yeah, definitely. I will summarize this.
Because I think we did actually get a little bit more signal than we had just in that thread, and I think we've come to a conclusion on sort of the scope, right, and what we want to have, like what we want to decide with respect to that straw man and whether we take it back to the PR. So I would ask everyone else to take this discussion back to that thread. There are notes in the hedge doc. Please have a look if you were at the mic to see if I am completely misrepresenting what you said. I did miss a couple of things because, it's a little late. Is there another issue that we want to bring up that we think we can make headway on tonight / this morning? I mean, the last time we did a scrub, we ranked these by the length of the discussion so far. I mean, number 5 here pops all the way to the top of that list by a lot.
Can go here. Last updated. Yeah, we have the scope. The scope is restricted to rate limiting networks only.
I think we have that's already solved by the PR that we just decided we're going to merge, right?
Yeah. And then we have the multipath. We haven't discussed. It hasn't been updated since.
I don't know, like multipath in a transport network is like, it's halfway trolling. Right. I mean, yes, we do need to discuss it. I think there actually is something that's going to need to show up in the working group document, a pretty skeptical analysis of sort of like unidirectional or like signaling on networks that have asymmetric routing, because like that's a lot of them. I mean, there's some language already in there that's going to be, I think, related to the multipath thing. Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I think that multipath actually brings light to the issue of indication, because you have a multipath pattern in which a communication starts on one network and then migrates on another. That's actually already enabled in RMC 9000, but multipath makes that even more likely. And that's a real communication pattern. It's sure. In that communication pattern, the whatever DPI we are talking about is happening on the first network. The second network only sees a fully encrypted packet that cannot be cracked. So are we going to say that, I mean, video communication will break in this context or something like that? I mean, that's why those things are tied for me.
Yeah, I mean that case already breaks DPI, right? So it's
it completely breaks DPI, yes.
So it's already a case where the networks are most likely not able to classify the flow.
Correct.
You can, in that case, you can, of course, whenever you go onto a new network, you can send us a SCONE packet on the first packet you send if you so wish. But if you don't, I mean, yeah.
No, you could. You absolutely could. But I mean, there will be no way to tie that SCONE packet to a previous instance of DPI.
Sure. That's great.
And I think that the reason I want in that is because it gives us clarity on the architecture we want. And I think the architecture we want is one in which the network is benevolent and tell the endpoint what it is going to do with its packet. Without having any kind, I mean, maybe the network did DPI in some other way, maybe they have whatever, maybe they throw a coin, we don't know. But basically, if the network is going to make decisions that are based on the flow, then they reflect those decisions in the SCONE packet, and the application does its best job of fitting within the envelope that they know will be applied. And if that's the model we have, then I think we don't need to have indication. We don't need to speak about DPI. We don't need that kind of stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think this is not the model we have. I mean, if you only look at throttling, maybe, the network is enforcing something and we want to know what the network is doing. But there are also cases today where you don't have any throttling. And I think it's still useful for some application to ask the network and get something that the network thinks is a viable rate that would be stable and that it can send traffic on. So there is another point of the protocol here, which is the client requests certain information and the network delivers it. And that's kind of what we want. In order to make this easier for the network, for both actually, for the network and for the client to apply this immediately, it is useful to have this information as early as possible.
Ian.
I just wanted to say that I don't think the multipath / path changing use case is a complete edge case. It happens relatively often on longer lived flows between like NAT rebinding and other things. So like it may not be a whole different network. In many cases, it's probably historically much more likely it's the same network. But some aspect of the 5 tuple can certainly change. And that happens fairly often. Also, server preferred address does the same thing. I will remind everyone. And so, quite a few flows actually will change 5 tuple. And I assume traffic identification just doesn't work today on those. I have no idea what happens. I do not manage a network. But I think we need to if we think this is going to be a general purpose approach, I think it's important that we address those cases with real intent and don't consider them like an edge case, but actually consider them maybe in some cases someday that might be half the traffic. I don't know. So.
Yeah, I agree with Ian. It happens a lot, net rebindings and so on. A lot of these network elements that look at flows and classify them and do policies are in a location that they are actually kind of unaffected by the NAT rebinding, because the NAT is usually kind of upstream from them. So they're looking at the more local IP space or already. But there, of course, there are many other reasons for tuple changes, and yeah, multipath is of course one of them. I mean, explicit choices by endpoints. It's something we need to consider, I guess. Yeah.
Are there other issues we'd like to consider while you're here? Going once, going twice, considering giving everybody 17 minutes back. Seeing no one rushing to the queue. So next steps are the call for adoption, again, runs out, I think, Monday. We'll make that call on Monday, and I expect, unless any broad objections come up in the next couple of days, we'll be asking the authors to give us a IETF 00 version of the document, call that adopted, with the current state of whatever we've sort of managed to get into the draft. I think we had a lot of good discussion on the initial indication. We haven't converged on that, but I think we have probably gotten to the point where we can at least pare that issue down to the point where we can at least make a call on it. I would expect us to do that, honestly, after we have the draft under working group change control. With that, if there is no other business, I would like to thank you all for joining us at this. I'm sure we picked this to be a maximally inconvenient time for almost everyone. So thank you all for your attendance and your attention and your awakeness. And we will see you all in GitHub on the mailing list and at the next interim. Thank you very much and have a great whatever the rest of your day or week is.
Thank you.